A while ago, when I reached 200 subscribers, I asked you all a question. What was the best time for electronic games? 75% of you voted for the 90s, which is entirely fair. But believe it or not, the least popular option was the 2020s. So the question is, are we in a good time for electronic games? Well, we're going to find out. But first, some rules and guidelines. There were more than 30 games that came out in the last 5 years, so this is not a complete list. Feel free to write other games from this decade in the comments below. Then, I won't count games that have the same design but a different revision. Thus, the reissue of the Simon Micro, Bop It Micro, or Bop It Classic will not be included. But the reissue of the Simon Classic and the movie Bop Its will be included since the design is different. So prepare yourself for some ranking insanity. And put some pants on! And we're starting with 2020. The worst game of 2020 is arguably Handsful, a game about tapping and grabbing colors to get yourself twisted. However, the game is so glitchy that it's basically unplayable. Up next is Kiss My Bass, a simple button-based Bop It clone with 7 commands. However, the game has pretty much no progression, no score, and the comments are way too long. Next up is the Baby Yoda Bop It, one of the many different takes on the Bop It Micro game. The sounds have changed, but other than that, it's basically the same easy gameplay. Still going up, we have the Simon Classic 2020. There's not a lot of variety, with only one game mode, but the gameplay is responsive and perfectly acceptable. Next, we have the Rubik's Revolution 2020 edition. While not as good as the original Rubik's Revolution, it has 6 different games that will keep you entertained. The gameplay's fast, the lights are bright, and overall, it's a solid game. But by far the best game of 2020 is Break the Board, a karate-themed Bop It clone with touch sensors and a breakable board. The levels are solid, the multiplayer is fun, and this is just a great game overall. Next, we go to 2021. The worst game of 2021 is Topple Off, a Hyperdash clone that also requires that you keep an orb steady. But the game has too many commands and not enough time to complete them, so it's basically unplayable. Next is the Spider-Man Bop It. It's the same gameplay as before, but the commands are really unresponsive. So why does it even exist? Next up is Silly Sausage Active, a sequel to the Silly Sausage which is even worse than the original. More than half of the commands rely on a motion sensor that doesn't really work quite well. Next up is the World's Smallest Bop It. Even though there's really nothing new, it gets a lot of points for the really small form factor. Next, we have the 2021 edition of Bullseye Ball. This edition improves on the original by adding more game modes. The gameplay is still as fun as ever. Still going up, we have the Furpinator. If you ignore the burps and farts, this game is excellent. It's part rhythm game, part reaction game, and part memory game at its finest. And the best game of 2021 is Crossed Signals. It's motion sensing done right. The modes have a lot of variety, and the game is solid to play. Moving forward to 2022. Imagine Silly Sausage Active, but in the shape of a horse. Then you get Giddy Up. Again, the motion sensors don't work, and the voice is simply atrocious. It's the worst game of 2022. Let's keep trotting and get to Darth Vader Bop It. It's probably one of the best movie Bop Its, but still, the gameplay is as easy as ever. If you like the Bop It XT, then here is Bop It Extreme 2022 Edition. It's buggier than an XT, sounds worse, and has no headphone jack, but the design is cool. Still going up, we have the Pop It Pro. This game is fun to play and it's fast-paced for experienced players. However, the first batch had a lot of issues. Oh, and let's not talk about the knockoffs. Next up is Brain Bolt Genius. This is the sequel to the popular Brain Bolt game, but a lot better. The games have a lot of variety in them, and most of them are really fun to play. The next game is technically a knockoff of the Flash Cube, but it's a lot better than the original. The Galaxy Cube has 36 RGB lights and 9 different games. Plus, it's one of the first games to use an ion battery instead of AA or AAA batteries. It might be expensive, but it's totally worth it. And finally, not only the best game of 2022, but probably the best Bop It ever. The Bop It button is a true masterpiece. Don't let the single button fool you, because it's harder than it looks. And I should know, because I lost many times. I seriously recommend checking out bopitforgood.com and getting your own. And now we move on to 2023. The worst one, technically, is Leonardo Bop It. I guess it's playable, but it's nothing new. Again, the next one kind of hurts, because Beat Blast was a really good concept, the music is awesome, but they kind of failed at the execution. The only problem with this game is the bash, or the yellow. It's just not working. Next up is Beat Board, a sequel to the Wobble Deck and Wobble Deck Extreme. Unfortunately, I couldn't really test that one. Next up is the retail version of the Bop It button. Quite a lot of content is missing from this one, but the core gameplay is here and very fun. Next up is Pop It Go. Again, don't let the small size fool you, it improves on a lot of things from the original. Plus, unlike the original, this game is somewhat blind accessible. But the best game of 2023 is This Side Up. It's a very simple game. You have to catch the box with the correct side facing up. But the execution is tuned to perfection, and this game progresses with you in the best way possible. And finally, we come to 2024. Bop It Stitch, nothing new. Next. Bop It Optimus Prime, still nothing new. Next is the world's smallest Simon. It plays exactly like the Simon Classic, but again, wins some points for the small form factor. Next up is Stir Crazy. In this game, you take control of a racing car while you shift up and down, turn left and right, and blow the horn. The game works well enough, but it's too short and has no replay value. Next one is Tic-Tac-Toe Bolt, a remake of Tiger Electronics Light 3. Unfortunately, I wasn't able to test it either, but people who've played it say it's very good. Next up is Brain Bolt Boost. Although not as fun as the Brain Bolt Genius, it is still a very good sequel to the original Brain Bolt game. However, the only way to check your score is to look at the dimly lit LCD screen. The final game didn't come out yet, but it's Hyper Dash 2024. Of course, no one had the chance to test it. But with the information we have, we can say that it's gonna be a great game. A brand I forgot to mention is Zanzune, and they made so many games in the 2020s that it's gonna take a while to count them all. So for your sanity, I'm only gonna name a few games they did. Pokemon Trainer Trivia, Word Fever, Super Magic Gin, some Pokemon Trainer Guesses, Resound, Will You Dare, My Map World Tour, and Shake a Story. So there you have it, pretty much every game from the 2020s. So now there's two questions. First, are we in a good time for electronic games? And to that I'd say yes. A lot of games came out in the last 5 years. But the other question is, are we in a good time for good games? And that is kind of tricky to answer. With all good games that came out from Kid Group, we also saw some rehashes, some knockoffs, and with that I feel we had quantity over quality. But what do you think? So, thank you for watching this video and cheers!